this Ranger is due for a motor. So this is a 2015 900 Polaris Ranger, and it's got 24,000 miles on it, almost 25,000. I actually sold this one to this guy a few years ago, had about 10,000 miles on it, and he uses the crap out of it. I've done a few things on it here and there, but finally, this motor was getting low on compression, and it finally just took a big turn for the worse. So we're going to do a motor swap on it. So I've got a new remanufactured motor, so we're going to walk through what it all takes to swap a motor, pull this one out, and put a new one in. So under the bed, we've got the motor. What we're going to start with first is we're going to pull the box off. Basically, there's just two bolts down there, and then normally there's a little hydraulic actuator cylinder right there that helps tip it back. But we're going to pull those bolts off and get this box out of the way. That just gives us a little more room to get this motor out of here. We're going to pull the air box off, the clutch cover, the clutches, pull off this intake plenum, exhaust, wiring, and then we're going to pull this motor up from the top. So I've got the tailgate off and then this air box off. This just pops off. Basically a screw there, and then one right here on there, and then the hose clamps for all the tubes. So a real killer on these 900 engines is the way this air box is designed. It hinges back here, and if you open it up too far, it will come unhinged back here, and then when you hit the little clamps, it's not sealing back here, and these will eat dirt. And that's usually the killer on these 900s, is they will just eat dirt for quite some while. This one doesn't look too bad, really. I mean, it's a little oily down inside there, but I've seen these throttle bodies and these intake tubes just completely coated in like a 1/4 inch of dirt sometimes. So next step, we're gonna pull this clutch cover off and get these clutches out of the way too. With the clutch cover removed, to remove these clutches, the secondary clutch just got a bolt there, and then this will slide off the spline shaft, nothing special there. Primary clutch, you got a bolt there. You do need a puller, which looks like this. Thread that guy in there, hit it with an impact, and it'll pop right off. Just like that. Our clutches are free, and then we'll pull off that backing plate on the clutch cover too. In the clutches, we've got this inner clutch cover. These are just held on with some 10mm head screws. We'll zip all these out and that'll pop off. With that clutch cover off and out of the way, we will need to remove a couple other things. We'll pull these spark plugs out. Fuel line's going to come off. This plenum is going to unbolt. There's one bolt right there. We're going to remove that and then loosen these hose clamps, and then this will kind of pop and rock out of the way. There's a couple electrical connections on the back side. This exhaust manifold is going to come off with these Allen head bolts there, and then basically there's a couple transmission to engine mount bolts there, and then on each side we've got a couple bolts there. So we're going to start removing that stuff as well and take the muffler out of the way too. So I've got this intake plenum free. When I pull this apart, I did notice this one boot's torn. I have to replace that as well. That is kind of a common issue on these 900s where they can crack, or even these clamps can be loose and they'll suck air. Then they'll do weird things like not want to idle or hard start or something like that. I think next I'm gonna pull this little heat shield off and then work on getting this exhaust manifold off and out of the way. Basically there's those Allen head bolts there, and then two springs down there, and then this muffler will come out of the way, and that header will be free as well. And then we need to drain the coolant out of this thing too. Exhaust is out of the way. We've got that exhaust manifold and the actual muffler out of the way. Coolant draining, basically just pulled coolant line coming from the head there, and then coolant line going into the water pump there and letting it drain. So we'll pull a couple more of those off, and then we're gonna work on these engine mounts on the front and the rear. There's a couple electrical connections to disconnect. We got our crank position sensor right here. On the other side, there's the water temperature sensor right there. So pop those off as well. So we'll unbolt these transmission to engine mounts. Two on this side, two on the other side, and then we've got front ones up there. There's a nut and a bolt on each side of there, so 4 front ones as well. This whole bracket kind of pivots on these rubber mounts So once I get those unbolted, what I do is I put a bottle jack underneath here, jack up on the transmission, and it will rock back that way, and it gives you enough room to pull this motor straight up and out. So I really just got a couple things left on here, and then this motor should be coming up and out. Motor's free now. You can lift this out about a hand, but I'm lazy and my back hurts, so we're using the forklift. So it should come out here in a second, and then we're gonna reverse this whole process and put the new one in. Just like that, it's out. And that's it. So here's our new motor sitting in the box. Let's unbox this here. So this one I ordered from Rev 6, which there's a few different companies that remanufacture these motors and stuff. These ones come with a year warranty, which is kind of nice. All right, looks like we got a gasket kit. And there's our engine there. So we will have to steal a few things off of this motor. Usually they don't come with like the flywheel, the stator, and the starter and stuff, a few little things. Well, let's get this thing all the way unboxed and then see what we're gonna have to steal off of that one and get this one ready and prepped to put back in. This new motor is nice and shiny, but we're definitely gonna have to pull a bunch of stuff off the old one to make it complete. So we're gonna take off this stator cover here, as well as the water pump, the hoses there, starter right there. This big mounting block that mounts to the transmission is going to come off. We will also reuse the thermostat housing, intake boots. We got the temperature sensor there, and then on the exhaust side, this is an oil cooler there, as well as like the crankcase breather system. I am going to power wash this motor off just so it's nice and clean, get all this dirt and crap off of it before we put it onto the new motor. So we'll do that and then start dressing up the new one. I just pulled off the water pump assembly here. This is basically held with 3 screws there. That slot matches up down in there. That's what drives the water pump. And then that guy's going to bolt up right there. So we'll put some new O-rings, new seal in this as well, and start buttoning all this stuff up. Next, we've got our crankcase breather and the dipstick. That's going to go right there. Install that back on, and then we'll probably do that oil cooler right there next, which is going to match up right there. We'll put some new seals and O-rings in that as well. I just pulled the stator cover off of the old engine. So there's our stator, the flywheel we're going to reuse, all the starter reduction gear. We'll have a new gasket that's going to go on there. So basically, we're going to transfer everything from this side to that side. So to remove this flywheel, remove the big nut here. This does take a specialty puller that threads onto the outer side of this flywheel and then runs inside there to pop that off. Everything else will basically just slide out of place. But yeah, if you ever need to replace a stator or anything, this is basically what you're going to pull apart to get to the stator on it. So we'll do that, and then got a few little things to transfer over, and then it'll be about ready to put back together. This is the puller that's used to remove that flywheel. So this is, what is it? I think a 50 millimeter, but it is a left-handed thread. Left-hand thread that way. And then run this bolt down inside there, and it will pop off that flywheel. Just like that. So behind this flywheel, right there, that's the one-way bearing. So that's part of the starter mechanism that rests right here, and basically it allows the starter gear to drive the crankshaft, but then once it starts running, it free spins on that surface right there. So that is a common issue if you ever have a starter that just spins but doesn't crank the motor over. Most time it's that one-way bearing. Every once in a while though, this little gear right here, it's actually kind of 2 gears bolted together, which I'll just try to pull it out here. These will come a little loose and they'll spin there as well. That's all transferred over now, so we'll just pop the stator cover back on and then throw the starter on this thing as well. I've got the water pump, the thermostat housing swapped over, water temperature sensor, and the starter in there. So all that's left is we're going to steal the intake boots, put them on there, and then we got to steal this big mounting block, which is basically just a few, I think 5 or 6 bolts there, which are going to bolt in right down there, and then this motor is basically put back together and ready to drop back in place. All right, we've got this motor all dressed back up, and we're ready to drop this thing back down in there. So we'll start sliding that in space and then kind of catch these front engine mounts as well as the rear ones back there and get the thing bolted back up in place. It's almost in place. I'm just lining up those front engine mounts there. This little bracket, this bracket there, that will actually kind of rock forward, fly out of the pry bar. And then we just kind of line up these rear engine mounts as well. All right, our motor is bolted back in place. So we're gonna work on some coolant lines. We need to hook that line back up, going to the water pump down here. Another one up there. We'll get all that stuff hooked up, and then we'll fill this thing back up with coolant and then kind of bleed and burp the system. I just filled up the radiator on here with more coolant. On these motors, there is a bleeder screw. It's right on the head. Right, let's see. It is right there. So we're gonna crack this open and get the air out of here. We're gonna leave this open until we get some coolant dripping out of there. We'll close it off and then finish filling up the radiator. All right, we've got some coolant running out of the hole now, so we'll tighten that back up and then finish topping off this radiator. I've got the intake manifold hooked up and tightened down. Put the gas line back on. A couple little connections for the temperature sensors hooked back up, and the crank position sensor right there. So now we're gonna throw this exhaust manifold back on it, throw some spark plugs in it, and we should be able to start it. We're gonna start without the clutches on too, just to make sure we don't hear any weird noises from the engine at all. I'm currently on the hunt for a 6mm Allen head bit, and I just found it. Oh, it's right there. It is balanced between two little cables. Oh, so frustrating when something drops down inside there. Well, we've got everything all put back on. So we've got the exhaust system back on, spark plugs and plugs back on, and all the electrical stuff hooked up. Other than the clutches, but yeah, we're ready to start this thing up. So let's see if it runs. All right, we're gonna cycle the key a couple times here and just let that fuel pump prime up. Sometimes the first time they start, they take a couple cranks just to get the air out of the system. About like that. Almost there. And we're idling. 1300 RPM. Oh, it died there once. Crank it again. Alright, it's running and idle on its own here. So I've got the primary clutch off. The main point of that is just to hear if there's any abnormal engine noises or anything. Sometimes the clutches can make a knocking noise. Also, sometimes they don't idle the best without the clutch on, because it's basically a big flywheel on there as well. So I think we'll probably put this the clutch back on quick, and then idle was a little rough till it kind of warmed up a little bit, but we'll let this kind of heat up and everything and kind of run through its paces and check for leaks and stuff, and do a couple heat cycles on it, and then take it for a drive. But we're about done with this project. All right, I put the clutch on. Seems to be idling much smoother. We're gonna let this run and just watch the temperature, make sure the fan kicks on, and let it cool back down, and do that a couple times. Then we'll put the clutches back on and take it for a drive. All right, we're on first test drive. It does drive. So typically on these new motors, they kind of tell you to kind of break them in under a load. So nothing like full throttle or wide open, but you know, kind of cruising 20, 30 mile an hour, varying speed and stuff. Kind of light use for usually the first, 5 hours or something, and then change the oil on it. So we're gonna drive this around a couple times, make sure the cooling temperature gets up to temp and our fan kicks on, and then we'll check for some leaks and then kind of finish it up and send it off to the customer.